Hello, and welcome to another episode of Baughcuts. Today, in this episode, we are examining Ralph's grief at the end of Lord of the Flies. And so let's set the context for this particular moment and this key quotation. At the very end of the novel, Ralph, of course, stumbles out onto the beach after being hunted across the island. By this point, everything has collapsed. The conch has been destroyed, Piggy has been killed, Simon has been murdered, and the island itself is burning. The boys' attempt at civilization has not merely weakened, but it's disintegrated into chaos, fear, and barbaric violence. At the exact moment when Ralph reaches the beach, however, a naval officer appears and the hunt stops instantly. So outwardly, order seems to return. And yet, Golding does not present this as a simple moment of relief or triumph. Instead, Ralph, and then the other boys, breaks down. What overwhelms him is not joy, but grief. And the quote is, "The tears began to flow and sobs shook him. He gave himself up to them now for the first time on the island. Great shuddering spasms of grief that seemed to wrench his whole body. His voice rose under the black smoke before the burning wreckage of the island, and infected by that emotion, the other little boys began to shake and sob too. And in the middle of them, with filthy body, matted hair, and unwiped nose, Ralph wept for the end of innocence, the darkness of man's heart, and the fall through the air of the true, wise friend called Piggy." Now, this is perhaps the most important quotation in the whole novel. Important especially because William Golding himself said in an essay that the central theme of the novel is grief. And of course, at first glance, Ralph is obviously grieving for Piggy, whom Golding calls Ralph's true wise friend. Now, that phrase, of course, matters. Piggy is not just a companion. Remember, Piggy allegorically represents wisdom, reason, intelligence, and the fragile voice of civilization itself. The adjective true suggests loyalty and moral authenticity, while wise positions Piggy as a figure of judgment and understanding. So Ralph is therefore grieving not only for a person, the person of Piggy, but for the destruction of all that Piggy himself stood for. However, Golding's final sentence makes it clear that Ralph's grief is much larger than personal sorrow. He, quote, wept for the end of innocence. And the noun end is absolute. It implies, of course, finality, termination, something that cannot be recovered. Innocence here doesn't just mean childhood innocence in some sentimental sense. It refers to an entire worldview, the belief that human beings are naturally, innately rational, decent, governable. At the beginning of the novel, Ralph is still in possession of that faith in humanity. He believes that rules matter, that assemblies will always work, that the boys will cooperate, that order can be built. By the end of the book, that innocence has been truly annihilated by experience. Ralph has not simply seen or witnessed violence himself. He's learned something terrible about what human beings, including himself, can be capable of becoming. And this is where the next phrase is so important: the darkness of man's heart. Golding becomes deliberately universal here. He doesn't write the darkness of Jack's heart or the darkness of Roger's heart or even the darkness of the boys' hearts, but of man's heart. And that noun man turns this from a story in this quotation relating to just one island and a group of boys, it turns it into a statement about humanity itself. Golding, of course, is suggesting then that evil is not some external force imposed upon civilization from the outside. It's something internal, it's latent, it's waiting to come out, and it is deeply rooted within human nature. In fact, maybe it is the essence of our nature as human beings. The heart, usually so commonly associated with love and feelings and humanity, compassion, things like that, becomes instead the location, the epicenter of darkness. And this is a profoundly unsettling inversion. Ralph's grief, then, is not just emotional, it's spiritual and philosophical. He's grieving because he's lost not only friends and safety, but he's actually lost something even more profound, his former old belief in human goodness itself. Now, Golding intensifies this through the physicality of Ralph's breakdown, those great shuddering spasms of grief, suggesting that his sorrow is not neat or controlled or in any way dignified. It shakes him, it convulses him. Spasms, of course, implies something involuntary and bodily, as though the truth that Ralph has encountered is so overwhelming it can't be contained by the mind alone. It's kind of spreading throughout his body. So grief is not just an abstract feeling, it tears through him physically. Golding presents moral knowledge, then, understanding the true nature of human beings, as traumatic, physically painful and traumatic. To understand the truth about us as a species is not enlightening in some comforting sense. It is absolutely emotionally and physically devastating. Equally significant, of course, is the way that Ralph's grief spreads to the other boys. Golding writes that the boys were infected by that emotion. They begin to shake and to sob too. That verb infected is really startling because, of course, it usually belongs to the language of disease and contamination. Grief then is presented here as contagious, like a virus, a viral force moving through the group. This word choice suggests that what Ralph feels isn't just private, it's collective, it's inescapable, and perhaps on some sense it's buried within all of them. For a brief moment, the boys can no longer sustain the masks of hunters or warriors or tribal savages as they're depicted. In the presence of the naval officer and in the aftermath of everything that they've done and been exposed to, they are revealed again as little boys. But it's a phrase that's deeply ironic. They may appear once more as children, but they're not. They're no longer innocent children. They have crossed a moral threshold. They have transgressed, and they cannot return unchanged. And that phrase, let's go back to that phrase, little boys, because I think it matters structurally too. Throughout the novel, the boys have gradually become less and less childlike in the typical sense, and they become more and more savage, more ritualistic, more brutal. Here, Golding, for a moment, restores the language of childhood, but only really to show how hollow that restoration is. Civilization can reassert itself externally in the figure of the naval officer in an instant, of course, with the arrival of an adult and he's wearing a uniform, but inwardly the damage still remains. The grief is, therefore, bound up with knowledge, the knowledge that beneath the surface of play and order and civilization itself lies the constant possibility of barbarity and savagery. So, ultimately, then, this final moment from chapter 12 serves as the clearest encapsulation of Golding's vision in the novel as a whole. Ralph's tears aren't just simply tears for Piggy, though they are certainly that, but they are also tears for innocence lost, for friendship destroyed, for moral certainty shattered, and for the horrifying recognition that the capacity for evil lies not in monsters or barbaric outsiders, but within ordinary human beings. More than that, ordinary boys. Golding leaves us then, in this quotation at the end of the book, with a vision of grief as the inevitable, traumatic, painful response to truth. Ralph weeps because now he sees clearly, and what he sees is almost unbearable.